I don't think that everything that happens online is necessarily like redundant and void. Like if you see, it was just a few days ago that it was almost 1 million people checked in their location at Standing Rock in Dakota. And that was something that happened online. That was one click from your bedroom. Because the police were using Facebook to try and track people that were at the protest camp, those 1 million people that checked in may have to some extent confused the police and prevented them from targeting those protesters as easily as they could have done if they hadn't have done that check-in. So I don't know whether like the online-offline distinction always means that what happens online is not relevant. But I think it links to a lot of the other stuff that we were saying previously about trying to make the political stuff that you do meaningful for people and also to make it fun. I mean, a lot of the people at UCL Cut the Rent, when there were kind of early rent strike demos, they didn't do this like marching A to B chanting thing, but they had glitter, balloons, confetti cannons, they had effigies that they burnt in the street, they had like these huge banners, they were playing music off sound systems, and I don't think that should be seen as a gimmick. That's something that's really important to make people feel sustained and engaged with what's going on politically. If something is kind of very serious and dry, it doesn't necessarily make it more meaningful than something that's like quite trivial and fun.
Having a meeting in a place where people feel comfortable, you know, like maybe not in an academic space, but in a pub or in a community centre, or it depends on the, you know, the audience you're trying to target. We try and do this as much as we can. And when we were doing the ones around London, like the demographic of our events was really young. It's just most of our audience was under 30, and these are all the people who are supposedly sat behind their computers just liking stuff on Facebook, but they were there.
I think one of the most useful things is kind of having small, tangible objectives that you can reach. Because I think one of the most disempowering things is, you saw it with the tuition fees movement or whatever, you know, like these big objectives, people march, it doesn't change, and then it falls flat on its face. There's a lot of community organising which isn't sexy. It doesn't involve a ruck with the police, which might be exciting. Sometimes it's necessary. But I think, like, for instance, in Bristol, there's actually quite an interesting organisation called Acorn. And they model themselves as a community union. They do stuff which people would probably think, a lot of people would probably think is totally apolitical. Like, they campaign sometimes to get speed bumps put outside areas where there are, like, kids walking down the street, because mums and dads have said, you know, I'm worried about my kids crossing the street and there's cars going too quick. Just the other week, they blocked an eviction from happening and managed to prevent bailiffs from taking a woman and her kids out of the house. So there's like a range of different actions that you can do. And I think that's kind of one of the most important things that can be done. And for instance, like, I had a friend who was doing some anti-racism work, this was a few years ago, in Dagenham, and he was putting anti-racist flyers through some flats in Dagenham. And one of the women who opened the door when they were flyering was like, oh yeah, the BNP were here the other week and they painted the corridor and they put a light bulb in the corridor as well. So I think, you know, that's like, I don't know what her political position was, but like, it just shows that, like, with actions like that actually have an impact on the everyday, that's the way that people begin to, like, develop respect, confidence and trust in you know, what you're saying you're offering.
When I was formerly working for an organisation called Bite the Ballot, like, we were told to think about how could we go into different spaces. So I organised a few events, but two of the events that I organised, one was like basically it was a political conversation, but it was happening in a chicken shop, you know. In East London, people love chicken, you know, or like people go to all the chicken shops, right? So, you know, a conversation that maybe a lot of people wouldn't go to, all of a sudden you say, okay, you can have free chicken and chips, no, it's not that healthy, and like a drink, people will all of a sudden come to that. Another event that I did in Northwest London where I live, I went to some of the black barber shops, because for me, the black barber is like one of the black British institutes. You know, I'm so proud of like what they have achieved in terms of business, in terms of just like debunking all of the stereotypes about black men. So approached loads of different barbershops, had a rapport with one of them and said, look, we want to do some conversations here about like politics. And he was like, well, no one's really interested about politics. So we started talking about what do you talk about on a day-to-day basis? Like, you know, and it was all politics, you know, whether it be, you know, racism, whether it be police harassment, all of these different things. So he said, okay, use my space. And it was one of the most successful events that I've ever been to. And just like the whole idea of like, you know, people of all races, but like just seeing mainly black men come in there, having conversations about politics, articulating themselves, you know, just before the whole Brexit thing happening. For me, it was just amazing and remarkable. And I think there's something about going into people's spaces and not expecting people to come to your space.